We'll now move on to the special meeting of the Urbana City Council when the clerk gives us the sign. You okay?
Okay.
All right, I'd like to call this special meeting of the Urbana City Council to order for Monday, August 1st, 2022. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Here.
Mr. Evans,
Here.
Ms. Hersey,
Here.
Ms. Colasetti,
Here.
Ms. Bishop,
Here.
Ms. Wilkin,
Here.
Mr. Quisenberry,
Here.
Mayor Marlin.
Here. Are there any additions to the agenda? Don't see any. Next item is public input for the special meeting of the Urbana City Council. Does anyone wish to address this special meeting? I will remind folks that following this is a public hearing and then the regular meeting of the Committee of the Whole.
Alan Max Axelrod, resident of Urbana, Ward 3. The home ARP allocation plan is a pretty good one. I just want to emphasize for future reference, Housing First policy is something that I had presented to the Champaign City Council and had a lengthy discussion with Mayor Deb Finan about. For folks who don't know, because we don't have any Housing First programs in Urbana, in the Cunningham Township, anything like that. And that's not a knock on the work that people are doing. It's just they don't meet the legal definition, and that's okay. But what that program is upon assessing that someone is indeed homeless, they house them. And then they get the wraparound services to address that. One of the key things is capacity. So I'd spoken to the city council about a month ago maybe about my former neighbor who has been homeless for a little over a month and a half. And that according to her, the township told her that the wait list for the family shelter, which isn't a large shelter, so this makes sense, was something like 3 to 4 months. Capacity would reduce that wait time. We're also, as far as our housing authority is concerned, which is a partner organization, not using all of our Section 8 vouchers. There is an award, or a ranking, I should say, put out every year for the housing authorities of the continuum of care that have had 100% or 100% plus in some cases utilization of their vouchers. Our housing authority has lost vouchers. I've literally talked to homeless folks on the street, confirmed with the Salvation Army that they were awarded a voucher and then it wasn't there anymore. So please keep in mind, capacity is a big issue, and capacity for Section 8, you can ask any private landlord to be a Section 8 housing provider. They can go through those certification processes. These are fixable, and whether or not it's included in this program, it's something to keep in mind for future redesigns. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to address this special meeting of the Urbana City Council? Okay. We'll move on to the one item of business on this agenda, and it's Resolution 2022-08-059R, which is a resolution approving an amendment to the City of Urbana and Champaign-Urbana, Champaign County Home Consortium for fiscal year 2021 Annual Action Plan to include the home ARP allocation. And we have several people here to present. Could you please state your name for the record and go ahead?
Sheila Dodd, Interim Community Development Services Director.
JD McClanahan, planner for RPC.
Betsy Barclay, Community Development Specialist at the City of Champaign.
This team here represents the Home Consortium, so I wanted to make sure.
Could you please speak into the microphone?
Sorry, make sure they
Sorry,
were
we
here
only have
to
two.
answer any questions that someone may have. So the Home ARP allocation plan, I think was presented in June 30th in draft form, open through July 29th, and we did not have any comments during that time period. The plan was developed by doing consultations. We reached out to 22 organizations that represented these categories: continuum of care members, domestic violence service providers, homeless service providers, public agencies, organizations addressing fair housing, civil rights, and the disabled, public housing agencies, and veterans agencies. We had 128 responses to an online survey that was developed. Again, the draft plan was released June 30th, and then not only did we send it to city council members at Champaign and at Urbana, we sent it to the Council of Service Providers to the Homeless, and anybody that participated in the survey, we sent it out to them too because they had a part in writing it. We brought the discussion before you on February 15th, June 13th, and July 18th. We held a public hearing. We took it to Champaign City Council on June 14th and the Champaign County on June 22nd. Through this process, we identified priority needs, supportive services to build and maintain stability, address the individual life circumstances of clients. This pot of money is unique that it'll allow us to do social services, which typically home funds do not do that. Another priority need that was identified was shelter facilities that are low barrier, 24/7, and open to a variety of household structures and identities, as well as increased access to safe, accessible, and stable housing. So the programming categories that are set here, those are defined by HUD. We cannot change those. The funding amount, this team determined the suggested funding based on research that we had done. So we suggested, and I'll go into detail what these cover in a minute, but $1 million for supportive services, acquisition and development of non-congregate shelters. We did not recommend funding TBRA, development of affordable rental housing, nonprofit operating cost, and capacity building cost. And these two figures, the $148,359, that's the maximum amount we can give to those categories. And then finally, administration and planning. So supportive services can cover a variety of things, from childcare, education services, credit repair, rent assistance, substance abuse services. There's a variety of things that can be covered under that category. And since it's so broad, and it was one of the most items that we heard there was a need for, that's why we funded it at that high level of $1 million. The non-congregate shelter, we recommended $400,000, and this is for private room units or rooms as temporary shelter, such as a hotel. There is no lease or occupancy agreement required, but maybe there's an old apartment unit that we can, encourage someone to buy or acquire, or rehab facilities to be used for that. Tenant-based rental assistance, we recommended no funding through this pot of money, and that's because it is eligible through the regular home funding. We have a large balance there, and the team has been talking about issuing RFPs to other agencies because there is a big demand for TBRA in the community. But since it can be funded with that pot of money, we didn't want to take away from the flexibility of the home ARP, since we had another avenue to pay for it. And here's some examples of how we have funded in the past couple of years. Typically, we would use the Regional Plan Commission's allocation of home money to cover TBRA, but as you can see, that changed in 2021, 22. Part of that is because when HUD redefined the amount of allocation, RPC went from getting 20% of the fund allocated to 8%, and 8% just wasn't enough to cover the need. So now we ask that they just apply for the funding that they need in order to get it spent in the 2-year time period that's required. So that's why you see the difference, the increase in services. The affordable housing, $1 million. They can be used to acquire, rehabilitate, or construct affordable rental homes. And of those, 70% of the funded units must be used for the qualified populations, which are defined in the plan. They can include manufactured housing, tiny homes, SROs, permanent supportive housing. There are a variety of affordable housing. And this is another flexibility with this pot of funds. Funds can be used to provide operating cost assistance, and that's not something that's usually allowed. Nonprofit operating, we can give $148,000, And that's to cover employee salaries, wages, education. If we have to increase, an agency has to increase staff capacity in order to address some of the supportive services needs, they can also apply for this round of money to help them build that capacity and cover operating. As well as the capacity building, it's the same. We funded it to the max because that was one of the biggest needs that we heard from our participants. And that would cover salaries for new hires, training, equipment, contracts. That's a difficult, salaries getting covered by an agency is difficult to do. So we wanted to provide the maximum amount we could. And then finally, administration and planning. According to the home regulations, we could get up to 15% of the grant, which would be $445,000. We chose to take the minimum that we thought we would need to cover our staffing cost, because depending upon the programs that are implemented with this funding, there could be a 20-year monitoring period, and that's very staff intensive and cost. So we wanted to make sure that those costs were covered. So why these allocations? Investing in facilities and supportive services will allow us to better address the underlying issues. We all know that there are needed services in this community to address the needs of the homeless. And so being able to invest in those will hopefully strengthen our partner agencies as well as offer services to our most vulnerable populations. We tried to take advantage as best as we could of the flexibility of the home ARP funds, because again, they don't usually allow us this flexibility. And so we tried to spread that out as best as we could. Obstacles to TBRA usage include inadequate units and reluctance to rent to voucher holders, limit the effectiveness of this assistance, and again, because TBRA can be used with our regular home funds, and we do fund them on an annual basis, we decided not to fund them with this pot of money. And then supportive services, again, is case management, counseling, and other supports that provide short to medium term rental assistance. And one of the things this team has talked about along with Champaign Township and City of Champaign is educating our landlords on the TBRA voucher holders and what's required, and help them understand, or us come together so that we kind of break down that barrier as best as we can. It's not going anywhere, JD. I know there's been some concern outlined over the past day on TBRA, and so I would like to recommend that we fund the home ARP as outlined, but then recommend that council direct staff to issue a request for proposals for TBRA using our regular home funding, since it is an eligible expense. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, we'll do questions for the team here and then entertain a motion for discussion. So are there any questions? Grace and then Chandra.
Thank you for the presentation, and I appreciate the input from organizations and background that went into this. I'm trying to understand the difference, because this is the home ARP versus the regular home, right? And so you're saying that additional home funding can be used in addition to this. There's the slide you showed us on TBRA over the past few years. Is that remaining home fund in addition to that?
Home ARP funds, it's a one and done, kind of like the ARPA funding, so we're trying to maximize our programming with it. But our home funding we get every year, and we set priorities in how we use it. And we have usually funded TBRA every year that people have requested it. We've used it for larger developments, such as Crystal View in Urbana and Bristol Place in Champaign. We've used it for housing rehab programs. So there's a variety of things you can use home funds for. But we do get that every single year. So that's why I would recommend using the 22-23 fundings, as well as prior year unexpended funds, to issue an RFP for TBRA.
But I guess my question is, that's still unallocated, right? This coming year's home
Yes, because we
funds?
haven't received, that's correct. We haven't received our final approval from HUD. That we're in that 45-day review period.
And so how much do you think would be available or reasonable for tenant-based rental assistance out of that regular home funds?
We would look at it and see what there's pending projects. Urbana's in talk with someone to do affordable housing. Champaign is too, but we've got a lot of prior year funding that is unexpended, close to $1 million. Because of COVID, some programs have been put on hold and not gone forward. So I think we could easily set aside funding to do, requests for proposals for a couple of TBRA programs. Whoever would apply for the funding would have to point out how many people they could serve, and they'd have to do it within a 2-year time period. So you wouldn't want to give one agency a huge amount of money, knowing it's a difficult program to manage, and would they be able to do it? I'd rather spread it out a little bit so we can get as much bang for a buck as we can.
Okay, and so you recommend that we go with this as is with $0 for tenant-based rental assistance because there's some more flexible options in this home ARP as opposed to regular home, and that you recommend that, we direct staff to allocate money from the home, additional money for tenant-based rental assistance.
Correct.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you. And I had a question on the development of affordable rental housing. We already kind of talked about the differences in the county versus city median income. And when you do the calculations based on the county, it doesn't come out to be affordable in Urbana. And I understand that you have requirements on your end to have it based on the county. But I'm wondering about affordable housing on this one. Does it mean that $1,000 a month rent as affordable, or how is that defined?
I would say that $1,000 is the height. We would look at an individual's income, and no more than 30% of their income can be used to cover their housing cost. So if I'm coming to you, to one of these agencies for assistance, and, I'm a CNA and I only make a certain amount of, say, $25,000 a year, no more than 30% of my income can be used to cover my housing cost. And so, that hits a lot of people that fall into that gap, and that's where this TBRA would help them cover the rent. If their rent was $500 a month, but their 30% mark was $300, TBRA would fill that gap.
And as I was asking more about the separate category of development of affordable rental housing, on what that means in general, because I understand it's based off of an individual, but are we calling affordable housing based off of the county in here?
Our MFI is, median family income is determined by HUD, and it's for our metropolitan service area, which is the county and a little bit north of us. So we do have to use those guidelines.
And is there any way to make it more stringent, like what we call affordable beyond what are the requirements?
I don't know. I would have to check and see. I don't remember seeing any of that in any of the directions that we've been given from HUD. Typical with this COVID money and ARPA money, the rules have rolled out as time's gone on. So we were still getting final rule information in June on the programs. But I think we can maybe make it more stringent. You can always go harder. You can't go easier, than what HUD requires.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful in conversations, just, hypothetically, if, we built a whole new apartment complex and rents $1,000 a month, and that might be affordable for the county, median household income at 50%, but not the residents of Urbana.
Right.
So I think it would be great if we could be even more specific about what affordable housing means in Urbana.
And keep in mind that this funding can be used countywide. It's not just for the city of Urbana. We administer the pot of money because we're the lead agency, but all of this funding can be used anywhere in the county, including the TBRA funding.
Thank you.
Chandra, then Jaya.
You sort of answered a couple of my questions when you spoke to Grace, but for the TBRA funds, can you go back to that slide where you listed, yes. So the TBRA funds for that RPC received in 21-22 was $150,000, and then also Courage Connection, $150,000.
That's correct.
And then the Victims of Gun Violence, $62,000. So those three amounts, they came from the regular home? Okay, so that's $362,000. Will that likely be the same amount funded for this coming year, or could be more?
It could be more, it could be less. We'd have to look at what developments are in the process. I know Champaign has a tax credit application that's been approved by the state of Illinois that is using some of this home funding. So they'll take part of their, share of it. But we also have a developer working with Urbana on building an affordable housing development. But guessing, knowing what our balance is, because of a prior year balance of almost $1 million, I would say that's easily, we could do, another 200,000-300,000.
Okay, and so since we had an amount left over from last year, I would assume the needs are being met as far as TBRA because we had left over?
I wouldn't say all the needs are being met. I would say that we're doing the best that we can. It's a difficult program to administer, and right now, we just have Regional Plan Commission and Courage Connection doing a program. In the past, we had, the Mental Health Center was doing a program, and then when Rosecrans took it over, they stopped doing TBRA. But other agencies can apply, so that's why we as a group had discussed, actually at our July meeting, about issuing a request for proposal to see if anybody in the community was interested in doing it.
Okay, good. I think that answers my question. Thank you.
Jan?
Thank you. You mentioned that the programs would have 2 years to allocate that funding. Is there a limit in terms of how long that balance of what's unspent, like that approximate $1 million, how long do we have access to that? I mean, obviously, we want to get that out into the community, but I'm also curious if we're at risk of losing some of that because we're underspent.
Right. Our home fund right now is in suspension, so with COVID, they have not enacted, but usually you have 2 years to commit, 5 years to spend. So that's why we're trying to, do all of these other programs to get some out there. And I do think that knowing what is on Champaign's table and Urbana's, we'll be able to get rid of a big chunk of that. But I do think there'll still be plenty of money available to issue an RFP for TBRA.
Okay, thank you.
Chris?
Okay, so I'm a little confused. You told Grace that there's $1 million for tenant-based rental assistance, and then you told Chandra there's probably 200 to 300,000. So where are we at with that?
I said there's $1 million balance in
Okay.
the home funds.
Okay.
And of that, we would probably issue an RFP for, 200 to 300. You can see typically it's 150,000.
Right.
The 1 year, the 2021 money was a little higher because we wrote a special program for COVID. We had some flexibility during COVID to do that. And
Okay.
so typically, these are 1 year leases. That program year allowed us to do partial year leases to help those impacted by COVID. But yeah, I think we could easily do a couple of funding RFPs.
Regarding tenant-based rental assistance?
Right, with our regular home funds.
With the regular home funds, and we're kind of estimating maybe 200 to 300,000? Okay. Regarding this reluctance to rent to housing, people with housing vouchers, that's a violation of our human rights ordinance, right? And so the solution to getting people tenant-based rental assistance is to enforce our human rights ordinance, wouldn't you say?
Right, but then again, keep in mind that prior to 2023, the rule changes.
Right.
Urbana has the most stringent
Right.
rules. Champaign and Champaign County don't have those same set of rules. And we can't require them to follow Urbana's rules.
Okay.
We require them to follow their rules.
Right, but January 2023, the whole state
Right.
cannot discriminate against source of income, correct? Okay.
And that's why we are thinking to reach out to the landlords and find out what those barriers are and what we can do to correct misinformation, or maybe it's a program design, maybe there's something out there, but not having that communication, we don't know for sure.
Okay. Also kind of missing from all the information is, Sheila, do you have an estimate of how many homeless or near homeless we have right now in Champaign County?
I would ask Braden on that. He is our lead on the continuous service providers to the homeless. Do you have an estimated number?
Was it on one of the slides
I don't remember. We've changed these slides.
That's a, oh, I don't know if this is
That's a great question. In the plan, it shows the point-in-time count results, which HUD requires that our plan is tied to that point-in-time count. We do understand that the point-in-time count is most likely an undercount of the literally homeless population specifically, although the point-in-time count does include a sheltered census as well. So it gives us a pretty good picture of who's in shelters, who's on the street, although again, on the street component, it's probably an undercount. I believe, I don't want to misstate any numbers, so I would definitely say in the plan it's listed in there. I think there were 2 individuals listed as chronically homeless, which meant they had been street literally homeless for a prolonged period of time. I think in terms of those in the emergency shelter, there was something along the lines of 116 individuals who were classified under HUD's classification as literally homeless. So I would refer to the plan, but that's kind of the general outline. But all of those numbers were factored into the planning process.
It's pretty impossible to count who's sleeping on a couch, right? A friend's couch and all that.
Unless they get services from one of the
Right,
agencies that
yeah,
participated.
yeah.
Because most of our agencies were really good about providing numbers of those that they served that we might have missed when we went out and did the point-in-time count, so. And then just as information for you, we will be doing another point-in-time count in August. Hopefully warmer weather, we'll be able to get a truer number, so.
All right, thank
HUD
you.
sets that January date, and it's nationwide that everybody does it for that 24-hour period.
Good, thank you.
James?
Yeah, a quick question about who we can partner with to administrate one of these TBRA kind of plans. I assume they have to be a nonprofit organization, is that right?
That's who we've, yeah.
Is there any barrier to perhaps Cunningham Township administering a plan that uses this funds?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean,
So-
they'd have to follow all of the guidelines of the
So
program.
they already have, people, volunteers, caseworkers and such to help pair people up with the plan.
Yeah.
So we could partner with that capability to get this distributed, use it all.
They also are administering our rapid rehousing program through Emergency Solutions Grant, so they
So
do
there's a
have
precedent
systems.
for it.
They do have systems in place.
All right, thank you.
Anyone have questions who hasn't? Mary Alice?
So Sheila, if this passes, what are the next steps here with this type of
If
funding?
it passes tonight, we will submit it to HUD this week, and that'll be in the 45-day review period from them. If we get the final approval back from HUD, which would be roughly first part of October, then we will create a team based on these members. I'd like to reach out to a couple council members and then some agency members who aren't going to apply for the funding to help us write up these RFPs and what are our thoughts. And we'd like to time it to close to what the ARPA money is so that we can take advantage of each pot of money but not duplicate services.
So, I mean, it sounds to me like this is very similar to the ARPA money. It's just designated for, because it's one-time funding.
It is one-time funding, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Grace?
Thank you. So I guess, first of all, on that same line then, with the regular home funding, like for allocating some for the tenant-based rental assistance, is that something that comes to council? Or, I mean, you'd mentioned direct staff. Is that something we need to do as a separate note, or that's part of the built-in process?
Final agreements will all come back to you. If you direct us tonight, as we work on this, to also issue an RFP for the home funding, I don't know that we need a formal resolution. We would do it as part of this whole process, but I guess I would look at the mayor and city clerk as,
Or if we need like a
We could do a
motion for
straw
that,
poll.
or-
We could do a straw poll, just to direct.
we could do what?
Straw poll or
Oh,
you
yeah,
could direct.
yeah.
Does that require a motion?
Straw poll for what, exactly?
The TBRA, separate from this.
Okay, but you said that the TBRA, I'm sorry, I'm out of order.
You could pass the home ARP funding allocations, and then if you wanted, you could do a second motion directing staff. to issue the RFP.
Okay. Other. Maybe I'll save that for discussion. Okay. So would that be before the one, or do you want a motion for the general approval first?
If you're finished with questions, I would entertain a motion for the home ARP funding allocations in the resolution that's before you. And then that would be followed by direction to staff. Mary Alice?
Can I just make a suggestion to swap it? So do a straw poll first to kind of get a temperature of council, because I think that might inform other people's vote on, because there's nothing on the board right now, right? There's no motion on the floor.
No motion is on the floor.
So I guess I would
Okay.
suggest that we just take a straw poll in terms of directing staff to do.
Okay,
an
do you want
RFP.
to formulate a topic?
I
for
will
the-
attempt to formulate something. I would like to propose that City Council directs staff to generate an RFP for tenant-based rental assistance, leveraging home funds, and give a recommendation to council on the amount based on review.
I'll second.
Yeah.
If we're doing a straw poll, it shouldn't be a
Okay.
formal motion.
So the
And,
top.
and that wasn't on the agenda, so I would recommend not doing a formal motion.
So it's, I'd like a straw poll on that concept.
So the straw poll would be to direct, your sense of directing staff to issue an RFP for tenant-based rental assistance that leverages the home funds and give a recommendation to council for an amount to review. All those in,
The straw
okay.
poll.
If you're on board with this, please raise your hand. Okay, let the record show it was unanimous. That's direction to staff. Okay. Is there a motion for the resolution 2022-08-059R?
I'll move approval of resolution number 2022-08-0599R, a resolution approving an amendment to the City of Urbana and Champaign/Urbana/Urbana County Home Consortium FY 2021 Annual Action Plan to include home ARP allocation.
Is there a
I'll
second?
second.
Is that a second by Chandra? Moved by Jaya, seconded by Chandra. Further discussion? Jaya?
So I just want to thank everyone for the thorough information. I think all of the responses to questions have been really helpful. I think when people see that 0 on TBRA, it's kind of like a, whoa, what
Yes,
happened?
yes.
But I think being able to talk about the other opportunities, and I know it was previously mentioned too, that some of the support services could go to TBRA if that need was determined more for that short to medium term. But I think this framing allows for that flexibility that otherwise wouldn't be available with non-ARP home funding. So I think that's important for the community to understand. This is about leveraging a unique opportunity with additional flexibility, while also thinking about how do we allocate our existing, more recurring funds to meet the community needs in a sustainable way. So I think you all did a really great job of demonstrating how these two things can benefit our community, and that the ARP funding is being allocated in a way to specifically fill gaps that we cannot fill otherwise. So thank you.
Any other discussion? Grace?
Thank you. I'd like to echo Jayo's well-said words on that. Appreciate this process for sure. And just wanted to highlight in there too, in the report asked on email, but just to share publicly, clarifying that there are over 5,000 households in the county on the wait list for vouchers, so that is a real need. And then also the discriminatory piece. And as you know, I agree that we can't enforce it everywhere in the county, but we can, and it seems our job to enforce it in Urbana. And so I know that that's not necessarily your department, but just throwing it out there, I would love to see that kind of collaboration between the different departments, possibly even our new investigators in law enforcement. I think that we've done my understanding is we've done some work on education, on outreach, on educating landlords, and it seems to me that at some point there needs to be real investigation and real fees and fines and enforcement of it if it's going to hold any weight. And I look forward to things changing more as that happens on a state level. I know it's been hard to hold our little island of our non-discrimination ordinance, but I think that it is really important. So I hope that we can work on both those pieces of getting more vouchers available and having more housing units available for voucher holders. And just wanted to reiterate, thank you for the thoughtfulness in putting this together and the recommendations for creative solutions, like recommendation to use the regular home money for TBRA so that we can use some of these more flexible ones, because I think that there is a big opportunity if we can build out more affordable housing and support long-term shelters and services with this. So thank you for that. And again, I hope that on the city level, with all the different departments involved, that we can have even more enforcement of non-discrimination for housing. Thank you.
Further comments? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
Ms. Colacetti?
Yes.
Ms. Bishop?
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin?
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Yes.
That motion passes. With no further business before this special meeting of the Urbana City Council, we stand adjourned.